Hey guys, Ken here with Hobby Harvest. I want to talk to you today about utilizing edge and travel corridors to make deer move where you want them to move. Now, first off, we probably need to establish what exactly a travel corridor and edge is. So, a travel corridor is basically just a man-made deer trail that you make in the woods. Now, deer are very efficient creatures and they will use the path of least resistance when moving through the woods. They're really trying to conserve as many calories as they can and not really force their way through the woods. Because of this, if we create trails in the woods, they will use them. Now, what is edge? So edge is the edge of a transition in habitat. So one of the things that you might be most familiar with is like the edge of, say, a cornfield or a bean field that butts up to the edge of some woods. Now, about an hour before dark, you're traveling down the highway, you look off into a field, where do you see the deer? They're always right on the edge of it. They're never out in the middle of it during daylight. So we can utilize that, the edge and the travel corridors, to get deer to move where we want them to move. Now, that being said, like if you're bow hunting, a good place to hunt is on the edge of a field because the deer travel along the edge of that field. So how do we put those two things together? Well, first off, what you're going to usually want on private property is food plots. What we can do when we make those food plots is make them in a shape that utilizes the edge of that plot to steer the deer where we want them to go. You usually do not want your food plot to be like an agricultural field, like a big square rectangle. You want it to be more of a boomerang shape or a kidney shape, for several reasons, not just for edge, because if a deer is on one part of the plot and can see the entire plot, that's not a good thing because only one family group of deer will go on to that plot without putting stress on other groups. Now that doesn't mean that multiple groups won't go on it at a time, but you'll see that they aren't exactly happy that that other doe family group or those other deer are on that plot at the same time. So how can we use this to our advantage? So if we own our own land, how can we create a situation that holds deer on our property utilizing edge and travel corridors? Well, let's just say we have a typical 40-acre square. And let's say that there is a road on this side of it. And let's just say you have a cabin in the middle of it, the driveway going to it, maybe some open space around it. So this is your typical 40-acre square. What we can do is put food plots in say, a corner like this. But we want to put it in sort of this L shape like this. Because what that will do is when a deer enters onto this plot, it's going to follow this edge around and almost turn the deer to keep it on your property. So you can do that in almost all four corners on a property like this. You can put in, say, 4 food plots. And it's also advantageous to spread your food plots out like this anyway for the same reason as spreading your deer family groups out in order to reduce the social pressure on them. So you could have one group here, one group here, one group here. We'll throw another one in here just for symmetry. So cool, you have these 4 plots, and let's just say each of them are about a ½ acre a piece. If you have 40 acres, a good acreage of food plots to start with is 2 acres. So putting in 4 ½ acre food plots is a good start. Now, how do we connect these? Well, what we can do is put in travel corridors to connect them. Now, when you make a travel corridor, though, you don't want it to be straight. If you're looking down the travel corridor, you don't want to see more than, say, 50 yards before it bends and twists and turns. So again, for the same thing of deer not wanting to have too many deer packed into a tight area, well, if they can't see each other, you can pack more deer into a tighter area. So let's just say we fill these connections in with travel corridors. Well, now you sort of have this like circle of movement that the deer are going to do. Now, deer are wild animals. They're not going to 100% follow these paths, but I like to think of it sort of like a race car going through a banked turn. So if the race car is kind of going slow or going at a moderate speed and it hits this banked turn, it's going to really just kind of follow along the turn and keep going. But if the deer are being pushed by something, so like that race car is going really fast, it'll push right over that curve and keep on going. So if a deer is running away from something, that this little bend in the food plot's not going to keep them on there. They're going to keep running to get away from whatever they're getting away from. But if they're just slowly grazing their way through your property, you can strongly influence them to follow along on these things. Now, how do you sweeten it up even more? Well, you can utilize water holes and mock scrapes. Now, I would recommend putting those somewhere along the travel corridors and not in the food plots themselves, because the food plot itself is already an attraction. So what you could do is say, put in a water hole right here and put in a mock scrape right here, and put in a mock scrape here, water hole here, put in a water hole here, mock scrape here, maybe we'll put in a water hole here, and a mock scrape here. Now, depending on your property, those things might not be ideal for you. You may not need a mock scrape or that many water holes for starters. I mean, I think I just drew 4 of them on there. That may be excessive, especially if you have like a creek running through your property or something. You wouldn't put in water holes anyway. But these mock scrapes can be really useful. Well, now, where should we put our stands? So something you need to think about when placing your stands or even designing your property altogether is your hunter access, because it doesn't matter if you have the most attractive property ever if you can't access it without busting all the deer off of it. So a typical property like this with the cabin in the middle of it, your access is going to be from the middle of the property. So since we put these 2 attractions right here, that would be a good stand location. It would be another good stand location right here where you'd be able to see this mock scrape and this water hole from the stand. So now you have 3 stand locations. Now, since these are only half-acre food plots, you may also want to set up a stand on those food plots. Well, you can do that as well, like this. And obviously it's going to depend if you're specifically looking for gun stands or bow stands, because your range is going to be different. But now, given this situation, you can hunt anywhere on this wheel depending on how the wind's blowing. So you can hunt your wind 100% this way. And then we need to talk about like bedding areas. So deer are going to bed down near food sources. So it's quite possible then that you could create bedding area like in these corners off to the back sides of these food plots as well. I realize I put the road down there, so that's probably not ideal to put the bedding area right next to the road. They won't bed there. But you would want to make sure that your access area is not bedding area if you're going to access like this. And we could also this isn't exactly to scale, we could squeeze this circle down a little tighter to allow for more bedding area along your borders. But this is a good example of utilizing edge to get these deer to follow by your attractions and then by your stand locations. Now, the other thing I like to think of with this is if a deer is, say, moving like across your property like this, like across this corner, and you're sitting in this stand here, this deer is going to be up here and out of your sight by the time it gets to you. But if it comes and it hits this edge of this plot, it'll follow along here. It goes, oh, I might as well check out that mock scrape while I'm right here. Maybe I want to hit up this water hole. And now that deer walks right past you instead of just staying on its straight trajectory over the corner of your property. So that's where utilizing these edges and these travel corridors can be very advantageous to you. All right, now let me do one more quick example of a property. Let's take another typical 40-acre square. Let's put the road again on this one side down here. Let's say you have a cabin in the front corner here. And again, some maybe cleared out area around it. Now, what you can do here is utilize the same technique in the corners. Put like a wishbone or a kidney-shaped food plot in your corners. And connect them with travel corridors, mock scrapes, and whatever. But what I also would like to do on a property like this is I would almost put in a food plot right here, but a long, straight, narrow one. That way, you'll actually be able to see some deer from your cabin or whatever it is here, but what you're going to need to do then is put in some screening here, like switchgrass or any other sort of screening, even conifers or anything like that. But then you can connect all of them again with travel corridors. And the same thing will happen here, but what's going to really change is your hunter accesses are going to be different. So let's throw in again a little water hole here, a mock scrape, a water hole. And now if you don't know what a mock scrape is, I'm going to be making a mock scrape video shortly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss that. So your hunter access in this situation is going to be a little bit different though. In a situation like this, you're going to access from the borders of your property and allow all of this to be undisturbed bedding area for your deer herd. So what you can do here is you can access into here. You can have stand locations anywhere around this outside border. And so again, you'll be able to hunt wherever the wind is ideal for you that day. You can pick anywhere around this circle to hunt. You might even want to put a little ground blind hidden into this screen here that you can access and hunt there. Now, since the deer should be bedding down in the middle here, you shouldn't be busting them walking around here. As long as you're keeping control of your wind and you're moving quietly, and again, you can have screening and whatever in here to try to hide you as you're moving through here. But if the deer are in this bedding area, they're going to come out onto your attractions. But then when they come out onto them, they're not going to just leave your property right away. They'll hit these travel corridors and these edges, and they'll wander around the circle again. Now, they're not going to just keep doing laps around the circle. Again, they are a wild animal, and they have a mind of their own. But what this will do is strongly influence them to go where you want them to go. So this is another good example of something you can do here. Now, I know everybody doesn't have a 40-acre square. The property I hunt in southeastern Wisconsin, I only have about an acre to play with, but it butts up against a lot of untamed area like swamp and woods and ag fields and stuff. So let's just say you only have this. Well, you can still put in a food plot, maybe put some screening in here, and maybe try to have a little bit of bedding here if that's what you can control in that corner. And then you have a hunter access that comes into here, into this corner. So you're only coming in and disturbing just a tight little corner to hunt the property, and the rest of that property is set up for you to take full advantage of deer coming in and using that edge and those travel corridors, even if it means that your travel corridors have to lead off of your property because your property is not big enough to handle all of this that's going on here. Now, you're a lot more reliant on your neighbors then and all of that, but that's the disadvantage of not having a ton of property. Now, these rules do still apply on like public land. So if there's edges like of fields, or there's trails that are cut through the woods for fire lanes or whatever, you can utilize those locations too, because deer will still travel on those, because again, deer are efficient creatures and they like to travel the path of least resistance, and they follow those areas through the woods. So I hope this helps you guys out. I hope you're able to use this to your advantage. It's January right now. That's a great time to get out into the woods and start cutting some trees. It doesn't even have to be with a chainsaw. I've made travel corridors with just a little pruning shears, just clipping little twigs and stuff out of the way, just enough to make it easier for the deer to move through the woods where I want them to move through the woods. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next one. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.